Charlotte Bennett stood in the grease-stained, narrow back office of Brooks Automotive, holding a pristine, slightly crumpled paper application form in her finely manicured hands, which she had tried so hard to conceal beneath the sleeves of a cheap, oversized denim jacket. Logan Brooks, wearing oil-streaked canvas overalls and holding a heavy steel box wrench that had seen decades of honest labor, paused his movements entirely as he looked down at the document, his sharp blue eyes taking in the sheer incongruity of her poised posture before a low, genuine chuckle escaped his chest. He set the heavy wrench down on the scratch metal counter with a sharp, echoing clang that vibrated through the small room, causing a stack of plastic clipboards to slide off the edge and shatter across the cracked concrete floor, the sudden, sharp noise puncturing the humid afternoon air as he leaned forward, looked her dead in the eye, and told her calmly that he did not need another employee because his 6-year-old daughter Emma was currently under the distinct impression that her father simply needed a wife. To find out how a billionaire automotive CEO running a global empire ended up working a grease gun in a struggling small-town garage, and how a quiet mechanic's hidden past would eventually bring a corporate board to its knees, stay until the very end. Before we reveal the extraordinary journey of Logan and Charlotte, if these stories of overlooked heroes, silent dedication, and the powerful truths that lie beneath a simple life speak to you, please take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments below, as we love welcoming your perspectives into our storytelling family. It truly makes one wonder whether the modern corporate world, with its aggressive expansions and total reliance on cold, algorithmic metrics, has completely lost its soul by devaluing the irreplaceable blue-collar competence of local craftsmen who actually understand the machines they build with their own two hands. 11 months earlier, none of this quiet, rustic peace existed in Charlotte Bennett's high-velocity universe, where success was measured strictly in quarterly dividends and global market share. As the chief executive officer of Bennett Motors, a $40 billion automotive empire based in the gleaming glass towers of Detroit, Charlotte was under a mountain of relentless external pressure from an aggressive board of directors. The primary source of her sleepless nights was a sudden, unexplained 24% drop in customer satisfaction metrics across their multi-million-dollar regional service hubs, a devastating trend that threatened to derail a massive upcoming merger. Oddly enough, the internal data sheets revealed that while the shiny corporate service centers were bleeding loyal customers, small, independent family-owned garages in rural Midwestern towns were showing record-high customer retention and performance metrics. Frustrated by the endless PowerPoint presentations, the empty buzzwords of her highly credentialed executives, and the slick corporate jargon of her vice president, Julian Vance, Charlotte made a radical decision to step away from her corner office. She needed to understand what these small-town mechanics possessed that her expensive diagnostic computers could not replicate, prompting her to pack a single canvas duffel bag, leave her luxury high-rise, dress in worn clothing, and drive out into the rural heartland under a complete alias. Her journey eventually led her to pull her dusty sedan into the gravel lot of Brooks Automotive, a weathered, 3-bay garage nestled in the quiet, tree-lined town of Oak Creek. The shop was owned and operated by Logan Brooks, a quiet, intensely composed single father who moved through his day with a rhythmic, unhurried precision that instantly commanded respect. Logan was 38 years old, his hands permanently stained with faint lines of dark motor oil, but his eyes possessed the sharp, analytical gaze of a man who saw right through complex machinery to the very root of a problem. He lived entirely for his 6-year-old daughter, Emma, a bright curly-haired girl who spent her afternoons sitting at a small wooden desk in the corner of the garage, color-coding her drawing crayons in old metal coffee cans while her father worked on rusted leaf springs and worn brake calipers. The local community revered Logan because he never charged a single dime more than what was fair, often spending hours diagnosing an intermittent electrical short circuit without ever placing it on the final invoice, embodying a level of corporate loyalty to his neighbors that the modern business world had long forgotten. When Charlotte walked into his office pretending to be an unemployed administrative clerk seeking a fresh start, Logan's initial laughter at her application was not born of malice, but of the pure irony of his daughter's constant matchmaking efforts. Yet, as he looked past her cheap denim jacket, He noticed the quiet determination in her eyes and the deep exhaustion she could not quite hide. And out of a deep-seated kindness, he offered her a 2-week trial position to manage his chaotic back-office paperwork. Charlotte accepted the low-wage temporary job with a nervous smile, entirely unaware that the quiet mechanic throwing away his old broken clipboards was about to alter the course of her entire empire. As the sun dipped below the horizon on her very first evening, casting long golden shadows across the neat rows of socket wrenches, neither of them could possibly fathom that a single undisclosed document resting in Logan's locked desk drawer would soon collide with a ruthless corporate expansion plan. 3 weeks of quiet routine would pass before the fragile piece of their new arrangement faced its first devastating fracture. Charlotte adjusted to her life at Brooks Automotive with a surprising speed that caught Logan's quiet attention, her brilliant administrative mind easily bringing order to years of disorganized parts invoices, customer records, and supplier schedules. From her vantage point, at the small wooden desk in the back office, she spent her days watching Logan work, completely mesmerized by his absolute mastery over the vehicles that entered his bays. One afternoon, a local resident brought in a modern hybrid vehicle that 3 different corporate dealership service centers had failed to fix, each facility claiming the vehicle required a completely new $6,000 electronic control module. Logan did not hook the car up to a computer and blindly follow an automated script. Instead, he spent 40 minutes in absolute silence, listening to the subtle rhythm of the idling engine, feeling the vibrations through his fingertips on the intake manifold, before identifying a single corroded grounding strap buried deep beneath the master cylinder. He cleaned the contact point with a wire brush, tightened the bolt, and charged the elderly woman a mere $20 for his time, a moment that filled Charlotte with a mixture of profound awe and intense corporate guilt. She realized that her own high-end dealerships were systematically overcharging working-class families based on cold, automated diagnostic programs that completely bypassed human intuition and true mechanical competence. During these weeks, 6-year-old Emma grew deeply attached to Charlotte, running into the office after school to show her new drawings of mechanical butterflies, and eventually asking Charlotte to braid her hair, a simple, delicate intimacy that pierced straight through Charlotte's guarded, childless heart. Charlotte found herself experiencing a profound sense of peace she had never known in Detroit, learning to appreciate the stillness of a small town where people looked at each other in the eye and stood by their word. However, the corporate machine she had left behind was moving forward like an unstoppable glacier, spearheaded by her ambitious vice president, Julian Vance, who had recently launched a ruthless regional consolidation initiative called Project Vanguard. This predatory corporate strategy aimed to aggressively buy out local properties, evict independent garages, and construct massive, standardized Bennett service hubs to artificially inflate the company's regional market share before the upcoming merger. On a rainy Tuesday morning, the harsh reality of Charlotte's parallel lives collided when an arrogant corporate field representative named Marcus, sent directly by Julian Vance's office, walked into Brooks Automotive flanked by a pair of expensive corporate lawyers. They did not look at the history of the shop or the families it served. Instead, they walked right up to Logan and laid down a formal, legally airtight 30-day eviction notice. Having quietly purchased the commercial land lease from Logan's elderly landlord behind closed doors, Marcus openly humiliated Logan in front of a garage full of local customers, laughing at his older hydraulic lifts, calling his independent operation a useless dinosaur that belonged in a scrap heap, and offering him an insulting minimum-wage technician job at the new corporate hub. Logan remained completely calm, his voice never rising a single decibel, though his knuckles turned white as he gripped the handle of a grease gun, quietly refusing the insulting offer and ordering the corporate representatives to step off his property immediately. In his haste to leave, Marcus accidentally dropped a glossy corporate prospectus on the office floor, which Logan picked up after the lawyers retreated into the rain, his eyes widening in shock as he saw the official emblem of Bennett Motors stamped across the top. As he walked into the back office to place the document on the desk, his gaze fell upon Charlotte's forgotten leather handbag, where a high-security corporate executive ID badge bearing her real name and title had accidentally slipped out of an interior pocket. The realization hit Logan like a physical blow to the chest, his face turning pale as he connected the dots. Instantly believing that the woman he had welcomed into his shop, the woman his daughter had grown to love, was merely a cold corporate spy sent to scout his business for demolition. Deeply hurt and feeling utterly betrayed by her perceived deception, Logan quietly asked Charlotte to pack her things and leave his property immediately, refusing to listen to her frantic, tearful explanations as he forced her exit into the downpour. This devastating misunderstanding forces us to consider whether Logan's silent endurance and his stubborn refusal to voice his true pedigree were a noble sacrifice to keep his daughter safe from corporate malice, or whether his prolonged silence was a tragic mistake that allowed greedy executives to trample over his dignity without a fight. As Logan watches his world crumble in the shadow of this corporate betrayal, many of you watching may have experienced a moment in your own career where your loyalty was weaponized against you, or where you felt completely unseen and underestimated by superiors who possess titles but no true understanding of your dedication. If you have ever walked in those heavy shoes, please share your story in the comments below so we can honor the quiet resilience that so often goes unacknowledged by the world. Standing alone in the empty, dust-mote-filled office as the rain began to beat violently against the glass windows, Logan began packing Emma's drawings into cardboard boxes, entirely unaware that his forced exit would trigger a catastrophic failure across the nation. 4 weeks later, an ordinary Thursday afternoon would plunge Bennett Motors into the worst operational crisis in its 40-year history. Charlotte Bennett returned to her corporate headquarters in Detroit, the heavy glass doors and sterile marble corridors of her empire now feeling less like an achievement and more like a gilded prison that separated her from the real world. She threw herself back into her work with a fierce intensity, but the memory of Logan's quiet dignity and Emma's heartbroken tears haunted her every waking hour, filling her with a profound sense of unresolved guilt and sorrow. She could no longer tolerate the superficial presentations delivered by Julian Vance, whose slick promises of record profits now carried the distinct scent of devastation and community ruin. Determined to find the truth behind the aggressive property acquisitions, Charlotte bypassed her usual executive channels and summoned her sharpest, most trusted senior data analyst, Rebecca, a brilliant young woman who functioned as her ultimate evidence finder. Charlotte tasked Rebecca with conducting a comprehensive, completely confidential forensic audit of every single independent garage acquisition under Project Vanguard, while simultaneously digging into the historic employee databases from a decade prior. Rebecca spent 3 consecutive days locked in a secure basement archive, cross-referencing encrypted financial logs and legacy corporate records until she surfaced a truth so shocking it threatened to shatter the company's history. She walked into Charlotte's corner office late on a Friday evening, placing a thick, faded manila folder on the mahogany desk, her voice trembling slightly as she revealed that Julian Vance had been systematically falsifying customer complaints and land appraisal data to force profitable small garages out of business for personal financial kickbacks. More shockingly, Rebecca pointed to an older, heavily redacted engineering file, revealing that Logan Brooks was not a simple, uneducated small-town mechanic at all. He was actually Dr. Logan Brooks, the legendary former lead powertrain designer for Bennett Motors, who had single-handedly engineered the Gen V engine block that saved the company from total bankruptcy 10 years ago. Logan had been ruthlessly framed by Julian Vance for a minor metallurgical defect in a secondary valve train, a critical safety defect that Vance himself had intentionally caused by secretly substituting cheaper, substandard aluminum alloys to maximize his personal year-end manufacturing bonuses. Instead of fighting a protracted, multi-million-dollar legal battle that would have exposed his young, grieving daughter Emma to intense media scrutiny right after his wife's tragic passing in a car accident, Logan chose to protect his child's emotional well-being, sign a strict non-disclosure agreement, walk away from his brilliant career, and disappear into total obscurity. Charlotte sat in absolute silence, staring at the old engineering blueprints bearing Logan's elegant signature, completely paralyzed by the depth of the corporate injustice her company had inflicted upon a good man. At that exact identical moment, a massive, Secondary escalation crisis exploded across the country as reports began flooding into the corporate command center regarding Bennett Motors' flagship vehicle line, the newly launched Vanguard hybrid SUV. Thousands of the brand new vehicles were suddenly stalling on major highways, experiencing a catastrophic thermal runaway within the newly designed dual-clutch transmission fluid coupling that risked causing major accidents. Charlotte's elite team of credentialed engineering PhDs was completely baffled. Their advanced computer simulations could not find the root cause of the fluid degradation, and the board of directors was descending into absolute panic as a forced nationwide safety recall threatened to bankrupt the entire empire. Realizing that Logan's brilliant, intuitive mind was the only force capable of understanding the foundational blueprint architecture of that compromised transmission system, Charlotte immediately drove back to Oak Creek herself. She found Logan working in his small residential driveway behind his home, quietly repairing a neighbor's old lawnmower, while Emma played peacefully on the porch steps. Charlotte approached him with a profound humility she had never shown to any board member, delivering an explicit, tearful apology for her past corporate blindness, offering him a multi-million-dollar restoration package, and presenting the immediate legal cancellation of his shop's eviction notice. Logan listened in absolute silence, his face an unreadable mask of stone, before he quietly stated his real, non-negotiable condition. He did not care about the money or the grand corporate titles. He demanded an absolute public disclosure of the truth, full legal protection for every independent mechanic ruined by Project Vanguard, and a total guarantee that his daughter would never be used as a public relations pawn. Looking into her tear-filled eyes with the calm, unwavering gravity that had defined his years of lonely exile, Logan finally reached for his jacket, knowing that the physical safety of thousands of ordinary families hung in the balance. Only 18 hours remained before the high-stakes emergency board meeting in Detroit would either save the company or destroy it forever. The grand, glass-walled executive boardroom on the top floor of the Bennett Motors headquarters in Detroit was suffocatingly tense, filled to capacity with anxious board members, elite automotive consultants, and an increasingly desperate Julian Vance, who was technically using polished corporate jargon to deflect blame onto the overseas manufacturing plants. The heavy double doors at the back of the room swung open, and Charlotte Bennett entered the space, flanked not by an army of high-priced corporate lawyers, but by Logan Brooks, who wore a clean but faded flannel shirt and carried a simple, worn leather tool bag that looked entirely out of place against the polished marble. The highly credentialed young engineers in the room immediately began to smirk and whisper among themselves, openly mocking the apparent absurdity of a small-town mechanic being brought into a multi-million-dollar computational crisis. Julian Vance stood up from his leather chair, his face contorting into a mask of pure corporate arrogance as he demanded Logan's immediate removal, claiming that an uneducated grease monkey had absolutely no place in a high-tech engineering war room tasked with resolving a complex digital fluid dynamics failure. Logan completely ignored the insults, his composure absolute as he walked directly past the executives and stepped up to the massive interactive digital whiteboard at the front of the room. Without uttering a single defensive word, Logan took the digital stylus and began drawing a highly complex, incredibly specific mechanical schematic completely from memory, naming real technical mechanisms with an absolute flawless precision that stunned the room into a sudden silence. He detailed exactly how the pulse-width modulation solenoids were experiencing a microsecond latency lag under extreme thermal loads, a hidden delay that directly fought the hydraulic pressure differentials within the secondary planetary gear sets, causing an unprecedented cavitation in the fluid coupling that no modern computer model had caught because the software algorithms failed to account for the fluid's molecular shear breakdown at specific atmospheric pressures. The room fell into an absolute, breathless hush as the elite corporate engineers realized they were not listening to a simple mechanic, but to a master of the craft whose understanding of mechanical systems transcended modern textbooks. One of the veteran board members, who had served the company for 40 years, suddenly gasps as he recognized the unmistakable, elegant drafting style and the profound depth of systemic knowledge whispering to the room that this man was none other than the legendary designer of the original Gen V powertrain architecture. The reveal struck the boardroom like a physical bolt of lightning, the whispers evaporating into a heavy, paralyzed awe. Logan quietly turned around from the whiteboard, set the stylus down with a deliberate click, and looked directly into the panicked eyes of Julian Vance, explaining calmly that the current transmission failure existed because Vance had authorized the exact same shortcutting software architecture that he had used 10 years ago to frame him for a failure he didn't cause. Before Vance could utter a single word of denial, Charlotte signaled Rebecca, who immediately distributed physical copies of the hard forensic data logs and encrypted emails recovered from Vance's private corporate server, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that Vance had systematically falsified the engineering safety reports both a decade ago and during the current production run to line his own pockets. Julian Vance's polished corporate facade completely disintegrated right before their eyes. His face paled to a sickly white, his hands trembled violently against the boardroom table, and he was left utterly cornered and exposed by the undeniable mounting truth of his own greed. As security guards stepped forward to escort the ruined executive from the premises, the board members turned to Logan with an expression of profound awe, entirely unaware that the most difficult choice of the entire saga still rested squarely on Charlotte's shoulders. Less than 24 hours would pass before a live broadcast press conference would demand the ultimate sacrifice of corporate pride. The following morning, the grand auditorium at the Bennett Motors headquarters was packed to capacity with major news networks, investigative journalists, and hundreds of silent corporate employees waiting for an explanation regarding the nationwide vehicle crisis. Charlotte Bennett stepped up to the microphone, looking out over the sea of flashing cameras and intense public scrutiny, with a calm focus she had never possessed during her years of chasing cold corporate metrics. Instead of utilizing standard public relations strategies to minimize the damage or shield her own position, she chose absolute truth and human connection over her own pride and convenience. At an immediate, massive short-term cost to her company's stock value and her personal standing with the remaining investors, she read a full, unvarnished public confession detailing how Bennett Motors had wrongly discredited and erased its greatest engineering mind a decade ago, publicly apologizing to Logan Brooks by name while announcing the immediate termination and criminal prosecution of Julian Vance. Furthermore, she announced the complete and permanent dissolution of the predatory Project Vanguard division, declaring that Bennett Motors would henceforth honor, protect, and partner with independent garages across the nation rather than seeking to destroy them. The auditorium erupted into a stunned, standing ovation, and though the company's stock took an initial dip that afternoon, the profound honesty of her statement won the permanent, long-term trust of the entire consumer market, solidifying her leadership in a way that numbers never could. Immediately following the press conference, the board of directors gathered in a private room to offer Logan the grand, showy title of Senior Vice President of Global Engineering, along with a multi-million-dollar stock option package and a luxury penthouse in downtown Detroit. Logan looked at the contract for a brief moment, then calmly and politely declined the ostentatious title, explaining that his place was not in a high-rise tower away from his daughter. Instead, he asked for a systemic, deeply meaningful resolution, the creation of a permanent, company-funded national endowment that would provide free access to advanced diagnostic tools, cutting-edge hybrid technology certifications, and fair parts distribution for independent small-town mechanics across the country, ensuring that local craftsmanship could thrive alongside modern corporate innovation. The board, deeply moved by his selflessness, agreed to his terms on the spot, officially restoring his name and credit to every single automotive patent he had ever designed. 3 months later, the bustling chaos of Detroit was replaced by the peaceful, cricket-chirping twilight of Oak Creek, where the air smelled of sweet pine and fresh rain. Brooks Automotive had been fully restored, its brick facade beautifully cleaned, its classic hydraulic lifts immaculate, and its bays filled with the vehicles of grateful neighbors. On the heavy wooden desk in the back office, a beautifully polished brass pressure gauge sat next to a colorful crayon drawing of a happy family, symbolizing the harmony that had finally been achieved between the two worlds. As the sun began to set, casting a warm orange glow over the shop, Charlotte Bennett arrived at the garage, no longer adorned in tailored corporate blazers or expensive jewelry, but wearing a comfortable knitted sweater and casual shoes. She walked inside and quietly sat down next to 6-year-old Emma, helping the little girl finish her math homework at the small desk, their shared laughter blending seamlessly with the ambient sounds of the quiet evening. Logan emerged from beneath a classic vintage vehicle, wiping his hands on a clean rag, a look of profound, undisturbed peace resting upon his weathered face as he looked at them. They shared a quiet, beautiful exchange about what true worth really means, realizing that it is never generated in the sterile boardroom of a corporation, but in the honesty of one's labor, the loyalty of a community, and the safety of a home filled with love. It is a profound truth that our world is filled with quiet, dedicated individuals whose brilliant talents and immense personal sacrifices are routinely overlooked by a society obsessed with superficial status and loud, empty credentials. So many of you watching have lived through your own quiet chapters of endurance, knowing your true value even when those around you refuse to see it. Has someone in your own life ever been misjudged the way Logan was, written off before anyone bothered to really see them? Tell us about them in the comments, even if it's just to finally give them the credit they deserved. If you believe that these quiet, overlooked individuals deserve to be seen, honored, and restored to their rightful place, we invite you to subscribe and remain a cherished part of our storytelling family, where true character is always celebrated. Thank you for staying with us to witness the final truth.